We consider these sanctions completely unsubstantiated, unreasonable, and very detrimental to the bilateral relations between two neighbors, between the United States of America and the Russian Federation. They are bitter because they have to leave before their term expired. What happened is they have to leave within hours, and it's just not human, frankly, not human.
Reaction from a top Russian diplomat on the sanctions that President Obama unveiled yesterday. So let's talk about it with our panel. Tom Rogan, columnist for National Review and Opportunity Lives. Leslie Marshall, syndicated talk radio host, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Welcome to all of you. And there were a lot of people who thought that President Putin would unleash something very nasty in return. But here's a bit of his statement today. He said, as it proceeds from international practice, Russia has reasons to respond in kind. Although we have the right to retaliate, we will not resort to irresponsible kitchen diplomacy, but will plan our further steps to restore Russian-U.S. relations based on the policies of the Trump administration. By the way, he went on to tweet, Donald Trump, great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart. Exclamation point, Tom.
Yeah, look, I mean, the Russians, I actually thought they might over-retaliate and get the U.S. ambassador out of Moscow. But I think what they're doing here is quite simple. They think they can manipulate Trump because he's playing right into that at the moment. They will keep playing this game until there comes a pushback point, which they have not seen, frankly, under President Obama. And I think these expulsions represent that. Why didn't he persona non grata the ambassador if he wanted to show a really serious message? I find it quite amusing, though, that Russian Foreign Ministry statement, the Consul General, that's Russian humor, nothing else. That's a sign of profanity to President Obama, of disinterest. They were tweeting out a photo of a duck. Because the Russians do, any American diplomats or Western diplomats in Moscow or journalists, they do far worse, far more inhuman things than that, going into their apartments and leaving gifts of every measure.
Special packages.
Yes, exactly. And read between the lines.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting, too, Leslie, because the statement from President Putin went on to say, by the way, any diplomatic kids who are in Moscow right now, we invite you to the New Year's Eve party at the Kremlin. So it's not on this tongue-in-cheek. What is this?
Yes, I think definitely. If President Obama were in his first term going into second, or if Hillary Clinton were coming in as president next year, I don't think we would have seen the same reaction and response from Putin and from Russia as we are. I agree. I think he looks at, well, I've got my buddy, which Democrats call his puppet, President-elect Trump coming in, so this is how I'm going to respond. I have to say, I think this is great that the president did this, but honestly, as a Democrat, I think he should have done it a long time ago. You know, I was looking at history with Russia today, and I was looking at not only hacking but spying. We executed a man and a woman in this country for spying. So, I mean, this is a serious offense. Even when Republicans and Democrats agree on something, we know there's a level of seriousness and severity, and I'm not surprised by Putin's response because, you know, next month it's a whole different ballgame for him.
It is, and there are questions tonight about the timing of what the Obama administration has done. Kellyanne Conway, who's going to be a senior advisor to the president, has been campaign manager to President Trump. Here is a bit of what she had to say about why now.
Even those who are sympathetic to President Obama on most issues are saying that part of the reason he did this today was to, quote, box in President-elect Trump. That would be very unfortunate if that were if politics were the motivating factor here, but we can't help but think that that's often true. Even the New York Times characterized it as such that this may be an attempt to box him in to see what he'll do as president. That's not the way that peaceful transitions of administrations work in our great democracy.
Charles, how much do you think what President Obama did is about Putin versus being about Trump?
Well, I think it's both. It was a twofer for him, but I think it's become rather farcical. Putin is showing his complete contempt for Obama, the way he kind of laughs it off. He decides that this is so trivial he isn't even going to retaliate, which is the normal thing you do. I love the way he invites American diplomatic kids to the Kremlin. I mean, what kid doesn't dream of a New Year's party at the Kremlin? What American kid doesn't? I mean, Trump, I think, has sort of played into it, and by congratulating Putin. but it's a smart move on the part of the Russians. You put no pressure on Trump, so you give him the option to drop the sanctions. But this is a complete distraction. These sanctions are meaningless. The only ones that matter, and even those sanctions are not that severe, are the ones that were imposed on Russia because of Ukraine. The two leading candidates for the French presidency next year are both opposed to those sanctions. Those sanctions are on their last legs, and that's, if you're worried about sanctions and Russian aggression, that's where the focus ought to be. These are going to be temporary sanctions on Russia for a few weeks. Maybe Trump will keep them. But as soon as they're in agreement on anything, some kind of trivial nuclear deal or something, the dropping of the sanctions will be a part of that, and this will be a distant memory.
Well, Tom, what kind of situation does this create for incoming President Trump with, as Leslie noted, there is bipartisan support for taking more serious action against Russia, for potential special select investigations into exactly what they did or didn't do with respect to the election. And now he walks in with praise of Putin, with saying it's time to move on with our lives. And he's going to have opposition on the Hill from both parties. He's
going to have opposition on the Hill, and it will create fraying because there's real anger on the Hill. But there's also real anger in the intelligence community, and there's concern on the part of Western allies. And if you link back to some of the things candidate Trump said about NATO, the Europeans are especially concerned, and potentially the UK is sort of offering this pivot to Trump to say, look, we'll try and get NATO to increase defense spending. But if he keeps doing these sort of tweets, playing Putin's game, because that's what it is, it's standard, manipulation, and if he keeps ignoring the intelligence briefings, the Russians think he's a joke, as a fact. They think he's a joke, and they think he's pliable. You're going to see degrading American credibility in the same vein, a sort of different version of President Obama's red line collapse, that American power is subject to the Kremlin, and more specifically subject to a KGB counterintelligence guy who never left the KGB.
Okay, so we have a late tweet from the president-elect today also saying Russians are playing CNN and NBC News for such fools, funny to watch. They don't have a clue. Then he goes on to add Fox News totally gets it. So, Leslie, if they think that he is a foolish puppet, is he also playing the game back at them with some reverse psychology? What's going on here?
No, I don't think that President-elect Trump is dumb. Okay, certainly he's made some very good business decisions that have certainly bode well for him. But I don't think he's as clever as Putin and his people in Russia, unfortunately. So no, I don't think, in a sense, he's bright enough to be, pulling that back, if you will. I think it's terrible that, regardless of who won, that anybody isn't concerned about this. And I think one of the reasons the president waited is there wasn't enough information. And I think that as President-elect, Donald Trump should care more about this country, because it's our election today. God forbid it's our nuclear codes tomorrow.